to states of shock. I'll just take a look and see what stands out there, both to me and anyone else. He's really going through the terms we've gone through. So if you start at page 45, where he's talking about, so under section 25, for example, let me just take you through. He's talking about digital enlightenment and stuff. On section 25, I just want to take you to the pharmakon there again. So it's it's italicized, and so the person filming has got the hiccups. That's cool. Way to go. He's using Kant. So one of the things that Stiegler does, and I think is the mark of a good theorist, is really try to link what he's doing differently with previous theorists. So he's going to Kant here, and he's talking about the constitution of a new age of mind and spirit. And then if you go down to the bottom of that paragraph, there, the second paragraph in 25, so we'll say, let me just back up. The passage from a toxic stage in which the digital pharmakon destroys the social systems that engendered it, and along with them destroys the processes of idealization, they make possible to a therapeutic stage in which the pharmakon becomes a tertiary retention of new circuits of trans-individuation. And then he goes, the passage from the current toxic state to the curative state of law requires, and he goes through what it requires. And I won't sort of go through that, but I want to draw your attention to that. The other, what else I would like to draw your attention to is on page 48 or section 26, where he talks about anamnesis. And that is when he's using Meno there. And it's also what Andrew, is it Meno or Phaedrus where he talks about writing? I think it's Phaedrus. So skip the Andrew part, but anamnesis, where knowledge is remembered. So he goes back to the Meno dialogue where Socrates is making the argument he can take anybody and he can get a collective memory coming from them because it's there, and he draws it out through his technique of question and answer, or his interrogation of question and answer. So it's individuation of knowledge through the individuation of the knower. It's bringing that out. So I would draw your attention there. I'm trying to see what else becomes important. To pick up on Simondon on section 30, the very first paragraph there, it's page 55 in the book, but it's 30 in terms of section. The worker's loss of individuation, as described by Simondon, deprived of his or her knowledge by the machine, seems to anticipate the scientist's loss of individuation, deprived of his or her knowledge by intensive computing. So just making a link with the loss of knowledge in terms of new grammatization of tertiary retention. On page 56 or a page, about 4 paragraphs down, the Simondian perspective on the human and the machine means that the human as psychic individual and the machine as technical individual must constitute a new relation where thought, art, philosophy, science, law, and politics form a new understanding of their technical condition, a new form of knowledge that Simondon called mechanology, which would allow awareness to be raised of the significance of technical objects. And I would just take it maybe through to the end, maybe the section on the robotic apocalypse, page 58 or section 31. The hyper-industrial state of fact takes what Deleuze called control societies founded on modulation by the mass media into the stage of hyper-control. the latter, and this is an example of 24/7 capitalism. And as I said before, there's a book called 24/7, which is worth looking at in terms of how capitalism changed around 2013, I think. The latter is generated, that's hyper-control, is generated by self-produced personal data collected and published by people themselves, whether knowingly or otherwise, and this data is then exploited by applying intensive computing to these massive data sets. The automized modulation establishes algorithmic governmentality in the service of what Crary calls 24/7 capitalism. And that's probably what I would take out of this chapter 2. I'll just go through chapter 3. I don't know what time it is, so that's okay. I'll just go through chapter 3 also rather quickly, unless anybody else has got anything on chapter 2.
I just have one thing.
Yeah, sure.
It's on page 61. He's starting, it's in the section on what is to be done to just the very phrase, to invent or to resist, question mark. I think that's a theme that he's developing that I think is really important as far as what megentropy is going to look like.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really awesome. That's around the second last paragraph in that section. Just as John said, the posing of to invent or to resist. And then he goes to Deleuze. He says, invention is in Deleuze what creates an invented bifurcation, starting from a quasi-causality that inverts a situation of default. But yeah, the question is something he's going to pick up in the latter part where he's trying to come up with solutions. One of the things that he talks about in chapter 3 is the end of sleep. 24/7 late capitalism and the ends of sleep. And the idea of this double of psychic individuals that are basically, that outstrip and overtake the flesh individual. So when he's talking about the loss of sleep, he's talking about the constant connection to worldwide stock exchanges, 24 hours a day, that happened in the second half of the 20th century. Now a human subject is in the making to coincide with these more intensively. And I think I would like you to go to page 69, which is section 35, the very last paragraph there. He says, I will argue at the end of this book that it's not only possible but absolutely necessary to change digital organology in order that digital tertiary retention becomes a differentiating factor for these individuations and for the transductive amplification of their potentials for individuation. In order to go back to the neganthropic, in order to turn the anthropic becoming of the Anthropocene into the neganthropic becoming, establishing the neganthropocene. And so he doesn't talk about that so much in the sections we are reading, although he keeps hinting at it. So if you're interested, go to the end of the book and see what he says. I think he kind of repeats he draws together what he's hinting at. He also talks about how our dreams are affected, that are noetic, on page 71, mental activity. If you go to page 213, so 71 is 37 dreams, fact, and law, and if you go to page 213, which is the end of the book, he talks on 213, I'll tell you the section that's in. It's in 96, above and beyond the market, honey and the income of noetic pollination. And it's the last two paragraphs there. He talks about the noetic economy, not just cognitive as an economy cultivating intermittences as the knowledge and power to atomize in one way or another. This is also what is at stake in life, and as that in which more than it, in a surplus value but no longer a profit, but the improbable side of life in its inventive generosity. So to go back to what John pinpointed in terms of invent or resist, which formulated in less lyrical terms means is neganthropic character. And I'll just read you this second paragraph there, because this is where he's sort of talking about what he sees as happening. It's necessary to refer to neg-anthropology with respect to what relates to us potentially non-inhuman beings, because it's only by passing through the artifacts that are tertiary retentions in general that we produce the traces enabling a sumptuary economy, which is an economy of otium, that is, of spirit, as that which is transmitted from generation to generation, that is remembered, and in letters above and beyond the mark, which here means as that which never loses its value, thereby constituting the canon for any value. And to put another way, through the traceology made possible by digital rectilation in the epoch of algorithmic governmentality and 24/7 capitalism, the neganthropus could and should produce a great wealth on the condition of not wanting to submit this wealth to the exchange value levered by shareholders, or what Mackenzie Ward calls the vectorlists. So that's part of that's where he's going with the analysis he's doing. And I think, let's just go to 91 and 92 as the last part of this chapter, and then we'll go to Kevin's presentation. So 91 is the quasi-causality of capital itself, where he's talking about the creative destruction. The accelerationists are going to pick up creative destruction. They're going to argue that internal to the system itself is the destruction of the system. We just have to take it to its extreme. That's on 91, so section 47, almost the third last paragraph, the one that ends in Gundries, up until it completely loses its mind and spirit, the force of capitalism is quasi-casual and consists in transforming the unwanted effects it generates into necessities, that is, into quasi-causes of its power. They go down to the apparatus in question, especially those devices that arise with the rectilarity of 24/7 capitalism, was not the fruit of strategies of power, but the concretization of a process of exteriorization that is as old as humankind, which is fundamentally accidental, artifactual, and artificial, which becomes at the end of a prehistory a process of grammatization, and the question which is raised for the first time in the history of thought by Marx and the German ideology and then the Grundrisse. So he drops his trace to Marx there, and he talks about the grammatization and how we externalize ourselves and exteriorize ourselves in the outside world, and how it changes historically until you get to what he's picking up as 24/7 capitalism. And then that should take us into, he ends on 92 with the partly which you get is a destruction of the libidinal economy. This is the last paragraph, second last paragraph, bottom of it in this chapter. The neutralization and inactivation of the masses are in a way an ideological and functional windfall that concretizes and systemizes capitalism's ability to make a virtue out of necessity, and through which it establishes algorithmic governmentality by seizing hold of this accident. Now, is there anything else there that I've skipped over? Maybe where he talks about tendencies and counter-tendencies? And I think the rest is sort of there. It's a good chapter, it's a good stepping off chapter to get to chapter 4. Let me just take you to tendencies and counter-tendencies. So that's under expressions of tendencies in digital madness. So he goes back to Leroy Gourhan, and he talks about what the evolution in the fields of techniques. We must always distinguish between technical tendencies and technical facts. And then at the second paragraph there, just this one sort of sentence will give you an idea of what he's doing with neganthropic or neganthropy. From the perspective of general organology, the play of technical tendencies and counter-tendencies and technical facts is always transductively arranged with the play of psychic tendencies. So transductive means that you're going across into another form, right? So it's always transductively arranged with the play of psychic tendencies and counter tendencies such as the pairs of eros thanatos, libido drives, reality pleasure, sublimation, regression, and so on, and with that of social tendencies forming metastable equilibriums composed of synchronic tendencies and diachronic counter tendencies. And he kind of brings it there together there, and does so in a way dialectically. And let me end with that, unless anybody's got any observations or statements on that, or posed any questions on that chapter. Online, yeah, you know.
Yeah, just something that stuck with me. It's a very basic argument he makes, that the ability to dream lies at the origin of all thinking.
That's right. That's very good. Yeah.
And furthermore, that he recognizes the tertiary retention process as proceeding from dreaming itself.
Yes, and he talks about
all like
night dreaming and daydreaming, right?
Right.
Diurnal dreaming and like regular night dreaming. Yeah. That's really important.
So,
and
yeah, that would be the root of the beginning of the process of dysautomatization.
yes, excellent. And he talks about, when he talks about his own writing, he talks about it happening while he's driving, so he's kind of meshed with the machine, and it's diurnal dreaming, daydreaming, but it's like you're awake but you're dreaming. You're in that sort of in-between state, right? And yeah, that's absolutely. Did you have a passage there we could look at just to mark that?
Yeah, I marked the passage in section 36, about 3/5 of the way through the second paragraph, or the very top of page 70. The ability to dream lies at the origin of all thinking, the latter being defined as the capacity to dream the conditions of its own realization, organology thus being constituted by a power to realize its dreams.
That's great.
It sounds very like eerily similar to Heideggerian awareness of death. And the bottom page 71, or the sixth.
In section Dream Fact Law 37.
Correct. In the paragraph that begins, such a program as a dream.
The dream says, say the skeptics, indeed the skeptics are lucid, and the moments of skips is necessary, because from it we learn something essential.
Yeah. The dream program tells us that tertiary retention proceeds primarily from dreaming. And in the following paragraph, he notes that the dream that thinks leads to all realizations. So that would be what he calls bricolage.
That's right. And also, thanks a lot for pointing this out, because it's actually the key part of the chapter. And all I've got written down here is ability to dream, right? And then I've got it underlined. I wasn't going to it. So in this in the paragraph, such a program is a dream. If you go to the noetic dream, such that it may become thought. So just that's really, really important. And Stiegler shows how he does that himself, right? So that's dream fact and law. The second last paragraph there starts with such a program as a dream, and then go to the noetic dream, such that it may become thought, and such that it's always the beginning of any true thinking. Great. Which is always neganthropic in passing through reverie, and that is insofar as it can dream the conditions of its own realization in the course of a anthropological process. That's probably the most important thing in that chapter. So thanks very much.
We could say that would be your Earth Hour, John.
That would be what?
One night, John's Earth Hour. We would have one night every year where everybody in their planet is requested to write their dreams down the second they wake up.
That's
good.
good.
Sort of accelerates some sort of process of real thinking.
That's great. That's great. Or the daydreams, where you're dreaming during the day, which is that semi-conscious state where you've got lots of good ideas. Or, also when you're doing something else, like if you're swimming, I get lots of ideas when I'm swimming because I'm not consciously thinking about it. And that works. Okay, that's awesome. Anybody else on that chapter 3 before we go on? Hold that particular passage on the ability to dream, because that's equivalent to, the idea of what it's equivalent to how Heidegger discusses thinking, and also how Marcuse discusses thinking. So that would be, and so in a sense then, Stiegler is located at slightly more deeper than either Heidegger or Marcuse in the unconscious process. Partly because most of our noetic functions are taken up at this point by the external. That's good. Okay, I'm going to turn that off and we'll go to Kevin's presentation. I don't know what that was. Thanks. Yeah.